Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I wanted to give you a couple of updates today and talk about three subjects primarily. Firstly, brief updates from the ground on Gaza, and we had a development in Syria. The second thing I want to talk about briefly is the latest updates when it comes to the negotiation towards the deal and a ceasefire, the potential ceasefire. And the final thing that I wanted to address is the recent statements made by the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. To start off with, on the ground in Gaza, we still had intense battles in the north and in Khan Yunis and other parts of Gaza. Israel's still really struggling to get into Khan Yunis. They're still being attacked, and we've had more intensity in the north, the area that they supposedly finished attacking a few weeks ago now. And they're still carrying out massacres. I mean, in the past 24 hours, we've had 13 massacres in which 114 people were killed and 249 people were wounded. This means that the total number of people killed since this genocide began is 26,751, with over 65,000 people wounded. These are tremendous numbers, and the barbarism is awful when it comes to this. I mean, today we saw images of the civil services in Gaza trying to evacuate people from under the rubble after they've been there for over 70 days. Imagine the state they would be in. They were prevented from doing so since the beginning of this genocide. Israel prevented the Palestinians from rescuing loved ones, and at one point we had over 7,000 people under the rubble. I mean, the exact number is unknown, but we're still talking thousands. Many were evacuated, the bodies obviously, but we're still talking about really high numbers. And we've had another development from Syria. We've had 3 missiles launched at Israel from Syria. The IDF confirmed this, and there were reports of the IDF attacking in Syria without specific locations mentioned. These were reported in Israeli media. And we're having a few more updates when it comes to the ceasefire. Now, multiple people from both sides made statements. Netanyahu made a statement saying that we are continuing this war, and we won't be releasing thousands of people. The deal that I spoke about yesterday, it spoke about 5,000 Palestinians being released in the initial phase and 35 Israelis from Gaza. So Benjamin Netanyahu's statements are not helping him and his government spokesperson. And this was reiterated by one of the Hamas political bureau members, Muhammad Nazzal, who had another interview today with Al Jazeera, and he said that there won't be any deal. All of the talks now are about a deal, but nothing has come to fruition yet. And we can't be talking about a deal unless we're talking about a total ceasefire and Israel withdrawing from Gaza. Netanyahu wants to have a deal with him still attacking to somewhat show his supporters and his radical extreme government that no, we're still standing firm, nothing will happen. This is coming at the same time that there are talks about potentially getting rid of the radical groups within the Israeli government and replacing them with other people and giving them ministerial positions. But nothing developed too much from that side. So when it comes to the deal, there are still talks. Clearly, things are happening. I mean, Egypt said we could potentially see a deal by next week, and we had the reports that Egypt is putting pressure on the US to put more pressure on Israel to accept the deal, because they can be going back and forth. They said we want a deal up until Ramadan beforehand, and they obviously want to prevent the prospect of things escalating, especially with the latest statements that we had a few days ago, with Israel warning Egypt that they're going to have a campaign on the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah section of Gaza, which is obviously tied with Egypt. You have an Egyptian Rafah and Gaza and Rafah. Israel wants to carry out an operation there. Egypt is hoping to reach a deal before things escalate and it becomes inevitable for them to take more action. And the final thing that I want to talk about is David Cameron's statements that he made today. He met with Arab ambassadors and he said that Britain is looking into recognizing a Palestinian statehood before reaching a deal. This is something new when it comes to Britain. He said that they want to push alongside their allies for at the UN for an irreversible process when it comes to the peace solution. He also criticized the fact that Israel is not allowing aid in Gaza and called it ludicrous. And he also criticized the past 30 years when it comes to negotiations. He also said that we need to have a technocratic government with a strong new Palestinian Authority in Gaza, and that they need to be sure that Hamas wouldn't be able to carry out attacks in Gaza. All hostages must be released for a long-term solution, and that Hamas leaders must be out of Gaza. And on each of these subjects, I have comments, and I'm going to try and put my comments through this video. But beforehand, obviously, it's important to put things in context and have a bit of a background. Now, when it comes to the British involvement in Palestine, they were main contributors to the problem, the British Empire. We obviously had the British mandate in Palestine following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The British took control of Palestine. They obviously had the Balfour Declaration in 1917, giving Jews a homeland in Palestine. And when I say Jews, I mean European Jews. Palestine already had Jewish people. They had a homeland. So they wanted to get rid of the European Jews and give them a homeland alongside the Zionist movement with Theodor Herzl. And I spoke about previously how Zionism alongside Nazism and including the previous British Empire, they gave an answer to what they called the Jewish problem in Europe at the expense of us. Now, there are multiple problems here. So Britain gave something it doesn't own to people who don't deserve it at the expense of the indigenous people. And as with many other empires, divide and conquer, leave problems. They obviously supported Zionist movements to Palestine, to historical Palestine, but they still had feuds with them. Like Zionist militias used to kill British troops left, right, and center. Zionist movements used to kill Jewish immigrants. They once took down a ship that the British refused to allow in Palestine just because the British didn't allow them to do that. And obviously you had the King David Hotel bombing, lots of attacks on the British, despite the fact that they allowed them to have a country. But they had lots of feuds with them, and even to this day, if you speak with anyone in the British Army who was in Palestine at that time, they will tell you lots of stories about how much they didn't like those people. And historically, obviously, Britain supported the two-state solution, similar to many other European countries and the United States, you know, the official two-state solution. Now, whilst we welcome comments and statements that pave the way to some sort of a solution, it's important to put everything into perspective and not raise the hopes too high, and obviously analyze these comments and what they're based upon. So firstly, David Cameron is still talking about, number one, a two-state solution. I spoke about many times, and I'll reiterate briefly, how the two-state solution is non-implementable. If you talk about the biggest problem with a two-state solution would be the fact that you have the West Bank. There are no longer 67 borders. So when the initial talks about a two-state solution were there, you were talking about the 1967 borders. Israel is already way beyond the 1967 borders. And even during peace talks with the Palestinian Authority, back in the 90s, we were already talking about approximately 90% of that region, including many parts of Jerusalem. So This problem of Jewish Zionist settlements in the West Bank obviously expanded. It became much deeper, much more rooted. Israel controls most of the resources in the West Bank. They have a de facto control over everything, and now they are talking about de facto control in Gaza, having a one-state solution, but not the one-state solution that we're calling for. One-state solution of equality, universal human rights, democracy, freedom. A one-state solution as an extension to the apartheid regime and ethnocracy and Jewish supremacy that Israel calls for. This solution, or supposed solution that the radical far right in Israel is proposing, will only deepen the problem. Now, many people would say the answer is a two-state solution. Give Palestinians their state. It's important to understand how things are on the ground before establishing an idea about this solution. When Israel talks about a Palestinian state, it talks about a demilitarized state. It's talking about councils that it controls. The problem with calling for a two-state solution is that you're building upon something that is already wrong. And if you want to try and reach a solution, you would deal with the root cause of the problem. Similarly to if you went to a doctor and you have a virus, he wouldn't just deal with the symptoms, he'll give you something to get rid of the virus, right? And the problem is with the two-state solution is it's coating everything on something that's not even implementable when you want to talk about it. It's not possible to take 800,000 people like that, kick them out. You'll talk about a civil war. I mean, Israel's already on the brink of civil war without this, and you have people calling for the complete opposite who are in the government. The government and the Israeli army are implementing, they're taking steps towards controlling all of the Palestinian territory. It's detached from reality. The second thing that I wanted to comment about when it comes to David Cameron's comments is the colonial tone in what he's talking about. So you want a technocratic government and you want the Hamas leaders out. As if David Cameron knows better than the Palestinian people who should run the Palestinian country and which people should be out. Are you a representative of the people of Gaza to say Hamas needs to leave Gaza? I mean, I mentioned in one of my previous videos about Britain labeling Hamas a terrorist organization, how many people, including in the EU Council Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations, I think it was Hugh Lovett who wrote an article a few years ago, how it hinders Britain's ability to reach a peace process, especially because you're demonizing such a large part of the Palestinian society. When you talk about Hamas won by a majority in the last democratically held elections. Now, many people say, okay, we hadn't had elections up until now, but hey, things are not optimal in Palestine. And when you want to talk about a prospect of a real solution, you can't exclude people or have this solution on your Western, British, or whatever terms. When you talk about a country, they need to have their own choice who to have and who not to have. The other thing he mentions is, they need guarantees from Hamas. They need to release all of the hostages. And he's mentioning, obviously, the Israeli hostages, not discussing about the Palestinian prisoners. Why? Thousands of them are there under administrative detention, so without trial, without access to legal aid, without their family knowing their whereabouts, and being assassinated, killed regularly, beaten to death without medical aid. He's only talking about the Israeli prisoners in Gaza, and guarantees that Hamas wouldn't attack Israel. So it's something interesting here. So he's kind of admitting that Hamas would remain there, but without the leaders. It's important to know that, because obviously Israelis are talking about, at least the Israeli government, getting rid of Hamas, eliminating them altogether. So David Cameron and the Americans as well, they're realizing that you cannot beat Hamas. But to get some sort of an image of a victory or whatever, or something to please Israel with, they'll talk about Hamas leaders leaving Gaza and making sure that Hamas are not able to attack Israel? Is it more important to talk about Hamas, part of the occupied, oppressed group from the most deprived area in Palestine, not attacking the occupier who caused their Nakba, their disaster, who's in charge of implementing this genocide against them? Or is it more relevant to tell Israel to stop attacking Palestinians and making sure that Israel isn't able to attack the Palestinians? Isn't that more relevant? I mean, the past almost 120 days showed exactly who the psychopath, who the maniac, psychopath, racist, supremacist is. So you're still talking from that arrogant and delusional tone and saying things that are completely detached from reality. The priority that we have now is to dismantle apartheid. You need to dismantle the core root of the problem, the virus. The virus is the regime of apartheid, of people having more rights because of their ethnic or religious background, and other people not having those rights because of their ethnic and racial background. That's the problem. You need to talk about disarming a country that is capable of committing such atrocities instead of going against the oppressed party, fighting to liberate themselves out of this oppression, ongoing oppression and genocide. Before the 6th of October, ladies and gentlemen, between 1948 and October the 6th, 2023, Israel killed 106,000 Palestinians. It expelled over 750,000 Palestinians from their homes. They destroyed over 500 villages in 1948. They continuously commit atrocities against the Palestinian people, depriving them from basic liberties and basic human rights. The situation in Gaza for the past 17 years is a very good example of that. A blockade, no right for movement, ongoing attacks, ongoing abductions. In the West Bank, it's even worse in many ways. In the West Bank, you have people who cannot travel from one place to another because they have 10 checkpoints on the way. They need to go 5 hours on a journey. Without checkpoints, it would take them 15 minutes. This is the reality. Field executions, kidnappings, shooting people for no reason, implementing a regime of ethnic cleansing and apartheid and supremacy. This is what you need to be talking about. So whilst we welcome comments that bring some sort of a new vibe or try and change things about, it's important to take them simultaneously with the actions that the same government is taking, like with the UK, for example, and the reality on the ground. You can't be calling for a solution and giving us all of this nice talk and not funding the UNRWA based on claims that Israel provided that haven't even been proven yet. And you're still siding with Israel, legitimizing their genocide, and you're still calling for a pause rather than a ceasefire. So no one should have any illusions when it comes to this. And we do want and hope for Britain to reach a stage where they actually apologize for their responsibility in what happened in Palestine for the Palestinian people and be part of a solution. It's important for that solution and that proposal to be substantiated and realistic and long-term, that will be built on equality for all people in historical Palestine and not give supremacy to any side at the expense of the other. And these were the main things that I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope I shed some light and added some beneficial information for you, and I will see you soon in the next video. Take care.